this is a great transition then into Blade Runner and how you try to make it. I guess what's the thought process of making it first of all, accessible to the fans, but also not like the same as the movie? Because sometimes movie games will literally be like a scene for scene thing, right? And that's not fun either. So, yeah, what was the
Yeah, I mean,
process?
as a huge fan of Blade Runner, and I was really the creative driver behind all the crazy things we tried to do with that game. I think I came up with new ones all the time, drove the 14 crazy. Um, as a driver of that, I think the motivation was fear.
Fear,
as
really?
a huge fan of Blade Runner, I was deathly afraid of putting out something that didn't pay proper homage to the
Right.
film.
I got you.
And first and foremost, I'm just a huge Ridley Scott fan in general. Alien and Blade Runner being like
Sure,
just amazing,
timeless
amazing.
classics. Yeah.
Well, just amazing, and the sense of terror that is created in both of those movies, those films, without a lot of action sequences. Neither one has much action in it, and Blade Runner is classically a story about trying to be disinterested, analytical, maybe robotic-ish, so much to the point where you're not really sure if Decker's a human or a replicant.
Right.
He goes about the world kind of dispassionately, but at the same time, there's a lot of fear. Like every moment, the world could just explode in violence, and it does. And it's the fact that when I used to tell the team, I said I want to play this game, and I want to be with my finger quivering over the mouse when I go from one room to the next, because I want to be absolutely terrified that something might happen, knowing that it probably won't. And that's hard. It's hard to create that. And so when you start with that's the emotion that I was really trying to capture. And then you say, okay, but it also has to be in this incredibly rich setting that just is, it's this dystopian future that just has there's so much social commentary and everything about Blade Runner.
Yes.
And how are we going to capture that? And early on, there was a couple of programmers that were like, hey, we should use the Voodoo FX 3D was just coming around. And I'm like, yeah, I don't think we're going to get there. I don't think we're going to get.
What is that?
It was just a 3D chipset you could add to your computer. Okay. But there were basically 150 polygons that were flat shaded. I mean, you're not going to make, you're going to just have a bunch of origami running around. It's not going to look
right.
And some people did, and that's not to dismiss anybody who did great stuff. But I'm like, look, we can't do that. It's just not going to. And every pitch that I heard at the time, and I think a lot of them that the Lad company, the Blade Runner Partnership heard, was basically, oh, we're going to do a Doom-like game where you're running around in a maze and you're shooting replicants. It's like, that completely misses the point.
Right.
That is not what the game is about at all.
Right.
And that might be a mini moment, and it's definitely about, or the film, that might be a mini moment in the film, that you could maybe make an exciting thing about that. But then you would have to set it completely differently. You couldn't set it in the game world because people just weren't running around the streets of LA airing each other out. And in fact, it was a crime to murder somebody. So if you shot the wrong person, you had to lose. And that's not really the way shooters work. So it was different.
Sorry here, but what was the kind of, because I watched the movie last week and it's a very, I feel, different experience viewing it today than it probably was viewing it, 30, 40 years ago. Was there a big fear that, our technology was advancing so much so that one day this would be a real concern? And were people really scared of the future when it comes to technology? Because today, I kind of look at the movie and with the level of inclusivity we have and all this stuff, I was like, let the robots live. They look nice. Like, I wasn't thinking about the same way, obviously, I would have thought of it maybe 30, 40 years ago.
I think we're still, as a species, we're still very afraid of creating something that will replace us. You don't have to do much research to discover the trying to think of the word.
I think it's because technology is so integrated in our lives now. That's the difference, right?
I don't think I'd agree. I think the technology, the singularity, the technical singularity that people are worried about with artificial intelligence is terrifying. As soon as we create computer that can create a computer. I'm sorry.
No worries.
So I'll start over. But I think that people are genuinely terrified of the technical singularity, because as soon as we create computers that can make computers smarter than us, that quickly devolves into something that can supplant us as a dominant species, if you want to call it. There's nothing that could say an electronic species couldn't be the next dominant thing. And there's tons of dystopian future stories of it all the time. We're genuinely terrified of that. And the fact that the whole thing of Blade Runner is robots or replicated humans that are so real that they're indistinguishable from humans, it just terrifies you right to the core. So I think that's actually part of the fun. And what was nice about the technology at the time is, we didn't have metahuman. We couldn't make humans that looked completely believable, and it plays right into the fiction because everybody
Right.
looked a little creepy and weird. The
Right.
real
Yes,
humans and
that's
non-humans.
perfect. Yes.
So we didn't we managed to avoid the uncanny valley by having the whole game be uncanny, which is just sort of weird.
Yeah.
Anyways, I could go on and on
No, no,
about
no. That's a great
but
discussion. Yeah.
this is really what motivated us right from the beginning was how are we going to make a game that you're afraid to enter into a room, and that led to the decision of, well, we're going to have to make it a simulator. That we had worked on a game called Circuit's Edge years earlier that had something similar, and the idea that when you were off screen, it was an adventure game, but when you were off screen, the game was simulating the movement of characters between the various scenes, even scenes that didn't exist within the game, and when they would be in the same scene, they might or might not transfer data back and forth. And
Wild, yeah. That's
that
very
created
ambitious,
this,
yeah.
yeah, it just created this really unusual, unpredictable adventure game that wasn't actually a branching story. People ask me all the time, can you just give us like a map? So especially for testing, so you just take the branches. I'm like, that is not how this works. It's basically a bunch of nodes, and there's conditions that have to be met to have that node fire, and the conditions vary based on the simulation. So we even have in there this really small nuance in there where the players, the characters will misinform each other and lie to each other behind the scenes. So if you really want to know a clue, you have to chase it all the way down to its root. If you don't actually get the firsthand report, now they don't lie to you if they tell you at all, so that would have been too confusing. But they lie to each other. So if you might talk to somebody who says, "Oh yeah, so and so said they were a replicant," and then you go to talk to them, they go, "I never said such a thing," And
It's
that
like
kind
telephone,
of stuff,
right? Or with a big long
yeah.
telephone.
So that actually made it even harder, which is why you needed that database called the Kaya, which is the knowledge information agent, named after my assistant and the voice of both Eva as well as
Very nice, yeah.
Kaya as Kaya Hunsinger. So
I don't want people to get this notion that I'm not worried about technology. Of course, every person is worried, but I just think it's a different time for me. From obviously in the older days, people were scared of computers because they knew so little about them. I kind of know, minus the algorithms and all that stuff. I know kind of what I'm dealing with, so maybe my perceived fear is not as high.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to see kind of the different things you try to do in the story. Yeah.
Yeah, technologies are slaves. So as long as the slave behaves, nobody fears the slave. Right?
I see it as a wave that we can't stop. To be honest, I don't want to worry about it.
Advancement's coming. It's coming one way or the other. We're going to have to learn how to deal with it. Asimov's rules of robotics, predate all of this, and they informed us a lot too. We actually did think a lot about the Asimov books and all the way from Foundation all the way through the robot books, to say, okay, what is really, because we were really into that goes back to Circuit's Edge again. We read a lot of the cyberpunk stuff, and you have to get it kind of boned up on all this stuff, and Neuromancer and others. And I think actually, if you look at Blade Runner, they got a lot of stuff right. The giant billboards that are animating the size of buildings, that was unthinkable technology back then. But it's here now.
Calls. They even got video calls, which was
they got everything. They didn't get telephone booths.
They didn't figure.
They blew on
phones,
telephone
right?
booths.
They didn't have cell phones.
But they didn't get cell phones. There's telephone booths, which makes no sense, right? Yeah. But it's weird that they have video calls in the car, but they don't have cellular phones. And in fact, actually, I still remember when we worked on Circuit's Edge, another game that might or might not be on the list of many games we made. But it was in the Boudiyin, which is an Arabic ghetto. And the writer, George Alec Effinger, had every character with a belt phone. And we used to laugh about it. We go, "Oh, that's just so ridiculous. There's no way."
Like just a physical thing on
belt,
your
literally a belt, a phone on your phone on your belt.
I didn't mishear you. I didn't mishear you. Okay. Good.
Oh no, yeah, it's a cell phone. But he didn't call it a cell phone. He called it a belt phone, and everybody would look at their belt phones, and everybody had one, and we're like, "That's just such a ridiculous concept because you'd have to have cell towers every few miles. It's right. That's just ridiculous.
We're not going to do that."
Who would do that, right? It's like when people said electric cars, that's ridiculous. You'd have to have charging stations everywhere. I'm like gas stations. Well, yeah, but
right.
Well, yeah. Right. Exactly, right? We can do it. Just do we have the will?
Right. Is it true that Ridley Scott was not a fan originally of the idea of video game